We've just gotten some pretty bad news that is going to have some negative implications for SUI, Pi, as well as XRP, along with kind of the broader altcoin market. We have seen some recent bearish indicators and some rejections that indicate probably an alt season is quite unlikely, at least in the super immediate term. So I want to go over some of that information today, and as well as discuss what this means and how you can actually change or kind of react to this news to make sure that you're best positioned to succeed in crypto. So overall, that's what we're going to go over. We've got a lot to go through, so let's just go on ahead. We'll dive right in, not waste any more time. And first off, I want to start by taking a look at the crypto bubbles, because what we can see on the daily is things are kind of mixed overall. But if we look at the weekly, we have seen a fairly healthy pullback. Aside from some kind of limited alts here and there, we're seeing a much wider pullback throughout the broader market. We can see Pi, SUI, and XRP all here. Pi down about 15, SUI about 10, and XRP about 6.5 to 7%. And this is in addition to a lot of the other large alts and memes that we've seen, WIF, Bonk, Solana, Radium, Stacks, Trump, Caspa, ENA, ADA, ICP, all these types of things. We talk about a lot of these on the channel, but we can see that there's been a pretty negative sentiment, at least within the last week, as it relates to altcoins. And so there's two reasons as to why this actually is. The first one we can see here is Bitcoin dominance. Bitcoin dominance is something that we've always kind of used as an indicator, or at least an indirect indicator, for where we could be heading as it relates to alt season. So as it relates to alt season, usually we need to see a little bit of a breakdown, as we saw here. This is what happened in early December when we did kind of have a little bit of that alt rotation. I wouldn't call it a full-fledged alt season, but it definitely was a little bit of an alt rotation. And what we can see is we did see a little bit of that breakdown happening right here, fairly clear to see. Since then, of course, we have only continued to go up, where we were following a little bit of this steeper trend line to get back on track to this larger, less steep, but more kind of shallow sloped trend line that we have seen over the past like almost 2 years at this point. I think it's like a year and a half. We can see basically ever since, I guess, the beginning of 2024, we've been following this trend line all the way up. And all the while, people have been predicting breakdowns. This was realistically the only one that we did see where we saw a reasonable amount of altcoin activity. Now, we did see a little bit of altcoin activity happening here in the March timeframe, but this didn't actually really impact Bitcoin dominance much. And I think it's fair to say that we obviously did not see too much happening. This was largely limited to the Solana ecosystem and meme coins within that period of time. Now, if we look, we can see since this alleged alt season, we've actually gone higher in terms of Bitcoin dominance, and we actually have not even hit lows that were the highs prior to this little bit of an alt rotation. So in my mind, we're fairly far away from seeing a reasonable run at an alt season. We did start to see a little bit of that breakdown here. We did break the trend line, but we have immediately come right back up. And the thing that's a little bit concerning here, and why I'm saying we've gotten some fairly negative news as it relates to kind of the immediate likelihoods of an alt season, is because we had this break, then we also kind of broke back through, we had a retest, got rejected, and now we're moving back up again. So this again is not really the best news as it relates to kind of a short-term indication of if we will see a breakdown and a larger alt rotation. So this is obviously not the best news. As it relates to alts, we usually see things, particularly as it relates to Bitcoin dominance, this is quite literally Bitcoin getting stronger as it relates to the rest of the altcoin market. And so if you are investing in alts, this is usually not a good thing, because you could have placed your money better just by buying and holding Bitcoin and not trying to play the market and altcoin casino. So that is something that's very important that we have seen, is we've seen this break continue to go up. And right now, we obviously aren't back at highs on Bitcoin dominance that we have seen, but it does look like we are still on the way to continuing that uptrend with no end in sight, which is of course a little worrying signs for alt season as it relates. Now, we also can see here for the total 2 market cap, we've seen something very similar. We saw a little bit of a kind of that run up over these past several weeks, or I guess months or so, as Bitcoin started to get a little bit stronger. We saw alts recover accordingly. And then we also broke through, kind of this level of support, but unfortunately we got rejected multiple different times at this key point of resistance, which is where we saw alts at in that December timeframe before we broke down. So unfortunately, we haven't actually been able to break back up into these levels, and we have put in kind of like a more macro lower high, which of course is never a good thing to see. So what we are seeing here now is it looks like potentially we're seeing some consolidation on a much longer time frame. You can see here the lows are in fact coming up because we did get a lower or a higher low here, but we are still getting lower highs here as well. So this could be kind of forming up into a longer time frame wedge that we could see happen to break out later on in this year. Again, I don't actually know for sure exactly when certain things will happen. All we can do is look at the charts and see what is going on from a high level picture here. And I did mention when we were in this range, there were kind of these two zones. Below this zone and above this zone, we're going to have a bunch of support and resistance in these zones in both directions. If you pull this out, you can see we just barely kissed these zones before getting immediately rejected. And now what we have seen, which is again, potentially some worrying signs, is we have also broken this level of support. Now it does look like we are putting in potentially a bottom here and trying to climb up and retest this resistance now at this point. But it's hard to say. We have indeed broken it, and there is a very realistic possibility that we come back down into this zone. There's kind of this level here, we can see about the 1.1 trillion mark, and then there's about this other level here that we have also seen kind of recurring resistance points at about the 1.05 trillion mark. Then of course here, we could potentially see lower here still at about 1 trillion, and then here at about 950, and then here at about 850 would kind of be that next potentially swing low. If we are looking for higher lows here, we of course would not want to be seeing this range, and we'd want to hopefully be seeing lows at worst of about 950 billion. Now, of course, any low above that is good news, but that's kind of what we're seeing here from the crypto total to market cap. Now, of course, this does impact XRP, SUI, and Pi coin, all kind of same but in different ways, and I want to talk about each because we've seen all three of them act somewhat differently in this type of market. So I think it's really important to check all of them out individually. We'll just do a quick review of each of their charts, discuss kind of the positives, the negatives, what we need to see, what we shouldn't see, all that type of stuff. So let's transition over to that and we can check it out. We'll start out with SUI here. As we can see, SUI, we've got a decent bit of price movement here, especially recently. We'll actually pull this up to full screen. We can see here we are actually pushing the bottom of the Bollinger Bands after only just recently kind of pushing towards the top of the Bollinger Bands. We've seen a lot of volatility coming out of SUI. If we look kind of over a longer term, we have come back down to this key level of support here, down at about this $3.10 range. So there is potentially the possibility that we do kind of take a bounce from here. If not, we're probably going to be looking at a further fall to about $2.80. And then from there, we could be testing the lows that we saw back here in April at about the $2 range. So this is kind of what we're seeing here. We did go up. We could not break into the highs that we were seeing back here in January and December, where we were kind of seeing peak alt rotation, at least for that point in time. So this is of course concerning, and this is the rejection that we're seeing all throughout the alt market. SUI has been a very, very, very strong performer, and it's even still was not able to break back in to its recent swing highs. And so this is kind of the issue that we're dealing with as it relates to these altcoins. And so we do need to pay very close attention as to what's going to happen and where we kind of bounce off of some of these lows. Right now, it's hard to say exactly for sure. We do have some potentially good news that I will get into a little bit later on in the video. But before we do that, I do want to talk about some of the others that we want to talk about, Pi being next, and then we'll finish off with XRP. So next, if we do take a quick look at Pi, we can see Pi looking a little bit worse, frankly, than what we've seen out of SUI, and I think that's completely fair to say, just from the price action that we've also seen. We saw here back in kind of February, Pi was not actually released, at least on a lot of the main exchanges, in the December-January timeframe, and so I think it had a little bit of kind of a belated type of run. And also this was because it was a TGE, not a TGE, but I guess like the tokens were made liquid. So people were able to buy, trade, sell, all that type of good stuff. And so we saw a little bit of a belated run here. And then we saw kind of the sell-off we would expect, just given that this was in some of the worst times in the market. We can see here the bottoming out coming in the beginning of April, like we saw with most of the other coins. Now we can see here with Pi, we saw a similar run happening to a lot of the others, making a bit of a comeback, but this is realistically kind of in hindsight, this was a pump and a dump. The price change here has been a little bit up from the recent swing lows that we've seen, but not by very much. And so this overall is not particularly the best indication for a coin like Pi coin, just because it hasn't really held much of the strength at these various levels of support and resistance that we have seen. We saw it bounce here kind of at this like 68-cent level, but since then we've seen it essentially sell off through all of these. At this point in time, potentially we put in a bottom in this range where we saw kind of some of these more micro levels of support and resistance. But it does seem possible that we could even get back down to this like 54-cent range. So it's overall really, really hard to tell. But at this point in time, Pi not looking particularly strong as it relates to some of these other alts. SUI, on the other hand, has been looking pretty strong, but still unable to break some of those previous highs. Now, next, let's take a look at XRP, and we can see, honestly, a little bit more rosier picture from XRP. Still very similar to SUI in the sense that unable to break some of those highs we saw in that November, December, January timeframe. We can see here kind of that just absolute price explosion on November after the US election. And then we saw a further run up here in January, running up prior to that inauguration. Now, XRP has moved slightly differently just because it is a US based coin. So it does move a little bit more volatilely off of some of these US news events and catalysts, just because there's a lot of kind of association with XRP and like regulation and banking and all that type of stuff. So that's why when we see a lot more of these regulatory things, XRP tends to move a little bit more. Now, what we can see here is we actually were in a little bit of a descending wedge, which is generally a pretty favorable structure to be in if you are a bull. We did at least seemingly break out here. We closed, several candles above, and keep in mind these are all on daily candles, just so we can look at more of the macro picture. And we can see here we did actually break out, and then we continue to kind of test the top side of this trend line. And again, unfortunately, we have broken below this. Now, again, we are kind of making a run trying to retake it, which of course would be a good thing to kind of stay broken out of this zone. Even though we are kind of trending down, it would be good to kind of be above this trend line. If we do break down into it, there is a very realistic possibility we could fall into this descending wedge, which could bring us prices as low as about $1.32 if we get kind of towards the end of this wedge at the kind of lowest point we could see. Now, if we look elsewhere here, we can see that XRP has generally done very, very well. Prior to the US election, we were seeing prices at about 40 to 50 cents, and now we're seeing prices right now at over $2 with highs of over $3, about 3.5 being close to where we saw the highs. This is incredible. I think it's very clear, and it's very important to note that this is by far one of the strongest performers that we have seen over, let's say, the past year, over the past 8 months, 6 months, things like that, because most other alts have actually given back most of the profits that they had seen in that kind of November, December, January run. Yes, there was a lot of money made, but a lot of these alts have already come back to the levels they were at prior to that run. XRP is probably the most notable one that hasn't, obviously, it's come back down a little bit, but it's still holding very, very strong from what we've seen out of, or what we would expect out of a typical alt. So this is, of course, really, really good news. Now, of course, it remains to be seen where we kind of bottom out before we start to see another move back to the upside. But I think if we go and return to the chart here, we can see it's looking really, really strong. And XRP is not one to be bet against, at least in my opinion. It's done very, very well up until this point. Now, of course, we do need to continue to see where it does actually go. Now, moving along, you can see if you are interested in trading, I do have those trading links in the description below. We are taking trades here on BTCC. BTCC is a great place to trade. They do have that 10% bonus in first time deposits. So it's a really, really good deal if you're just looking for some free money. And they do also have up to $10,055 in trading and deposit bonuses, which is of course another really good thing, along with no KYC or VPN needed. Now you can see here XRP, SUI, Ondo, Bitcoin. These are all the positions that I have open. Ondo's been one that's kind of fluctuated both positive and negative. SUI has pulled back. This was up about 200% at one point. I have been taking profits the whole way. If, again, not financial advice, you need to be doing and making your own decisions, but it is a very, very, very strong and like immutable belief of mine that you need to be taking profits when price goes up. So when price goes up, I take profits. And as we can see here, we're still in profit on a lot of these, but I've been very, very diligent at trimming these position sizes down as we do go, because it's very, very important to kind of make sure that you're doing that. So if you are interested, I do have those links in the description below. Now I wanted, as I said earlier on in the video, I wanted to share with you one thing that in my mind signals that things could potentially have seen or maybe getting close to a bottom at this point, and we could start to see maybe a little bit of a bounce, which could spark some hopes in an alt season, maybe not in the immediate term, but maybe in like the kind of shorter to nearer term future. So if we look here, this is the exchange liquidation map. Now, if you've been following the channel for a while, this liquidation map is absolute gold in my opinion. I use this very, very frequently, and it's honestly directionally almost 100% correct. Now, the reason why is because this is predicting at what price points money gets liquidated, and it shows you how much money gets liquidated at that certain price point. Now, of course, we do all know the market makers really do like to hunt for free money, and this is a great way to do so. So if you can follow the liquidation map and essentially bet the opposite direction of where all the liquidations are, it's been pretty accurate so far, at least in terms of pointing direction. Timing, of course, is very, very hard to predict. But what we can see here is we've started to see things flip. So overall, we're seeing that there was a bunch of long liquidations over time just because the market was getting super bullish. Everybody was longing Bitcoin, all that type of stuff. And we could see at one point, this was like over 20 billion, which is an insane amount of volume to be liquidating at this point. Usually we've seen like close to half. Even 16 is still very, very high. And we've usually seen kind of in like that 8 to 12 range, 12 being high kind of in its own right. So what we can see here is this has actually started to come down, and we've also started to see shorts pile up on the other side with about 12.5 billion in shorts. Now again, this is on the 30-day here. If we want to take a look at the 7-day, we can see that things have actually just flipped. So now it actually predicts right now that it would be the best, it would be in the interest of the market makers to move the market up because that's where all the money is. You can see here, if they moved all the way down to 93,000, there'd be only about $3 billion liquidated, where if we moved all the way up to 115,000, there'd be about $12.5 billion liquidated. Now, if we go and we look at the 1 day, we can see something similar. Again, this is being a little bit more balanced here, about 2.29 to about 2.14 billion. So pretty balanced in both directions. And we are seeing, again, kind of a little bit of a slant down to liquidating longs, but a little bit more balanced on the 30-day as well. Now, the reason that this is important to note is because usually I'm not looking to do anything too crazy unless we see confluence between the three. If we can see all three are looking super, actually, we'll go back and we'll take a quick look at the 7-day, and we could see like, if we could see essentially a similar looking picture on all three, I would be able to say with somewhat high confidence that we would be able to see that Bitcoin's price would be going up in the relatively near future. Now, of course, we're not seeing that between all three, which is why I'm not doing anything too crazy right now. But it's very, very important to keep a close eye on this because it can actually kind of predict a shift in the markets before we see it. And we are actually starting to see that shift. Now, the reason why I'm focusing on Bitcoin specifically here is because we do need to see kind of that optimism, that euphoria hitting Bitcoin first, and then we need to see that momentum carry on into the smaller alts. We haven't seen it carry on into the smaller alts yet. But also at the same time, if Bitcoin starts to fall off and the optimism is lost a little bit, there's a problem because that's just something that, you know, that kind of takes all of the momentum away from alts before they can even get started. So in my opinion, it's really, really important to keep a close eye on this and make sure that we see Bitcoin be successful, because that, in my opinion, again, will kind of flush all of the liquidity down into these smaller alts, which is kind of where we would get that better and kind of more crazy alt season that I think a lot of us are hoping for. So anyway, that's kind of what I've got today as far as an update and where I'm seeing kind of the alt market sitting, as well as what we're seeing specifically with XRP, Pi, and SUI, and how we could see them kind of adapt and kind of turn out over the next weeks, months, years, all that type of stuff. Overall, I do still think the fundamental picture of crypto is very, very bullish. It's just timing is everything, particularly with alts. And so in my mind, I just at least don't think we're going to see anything coming out of the alt market, at least in that immediate future. I do still think there is a path for us to get there within maybe the next year, 18 months, something like that. I definitely think things are looking that way. We just need to have that timing correct. And at least right now, that doesn't seem to be or it doesn't seem to look like now is that right time. So anyway, hopefully you found the information in this video useful. If you did, a like and a subscribe really, really does help me out. If you are interested, continue to follow along, press that notification bell as well. And if you do have any comments, questions, concerns, want to learn more about any of this type of stuff, feel free to hit that or to drop a comment in the comment section. I do read and respond to all of those. So if you have anything that you want me to see, that'd be a great way to do so. Thank you guys for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next one.